Yeah,
Thank
good to
you.
see all of you guys too. Thank you guys for showing up tonight. Even though we have a limited compressed class tonight, I think we can still learn a lot, especially some concrete things that you can take out of class and really start to use as tools when you're thinking about how you're studying. I think my first big piece of advice for you guys is that studying for the SAT, which if you've already started, it is not something that you should study the same way that you do for your classes at school. That I almost think of it like software, like you need to download new software and start running some unique ideas on your brain while you are studying, thinking, and practicing. It can be really difficult if you study the same way and you will repeat the same mistakes over and over and over. And so one of my biggest goals is to help you guys streamline this. Let me share my screen with you guys and introduce one core tool that you guys really can make strong use out of. Let me show you this. I would say also just in general, you can see this exam that I was working on with one of my students. You should be annotating very, very aggressively while you are practicing and while you're performing. I often think that there is a real linear correlation between how well you annotate and then how well you perform your accuracy on the questions. If you are not annotating carefully and closely, what's going to happen is that your pacing will suffer, that you will adjudicate a particular answer, you'll think through it, maybe you'll make a decision and say, okay, it's not A or B, let me think about C or D. If you did not annotate carefully how you were thinking through A and B, by the time you get through mulling over C and D, you're going to slip back and think, wait, am I sure it's not A or B? And so even something like, look at 15. This is one very concrete tool that most people never notice, and I call these yolks. And so not like an egg yolk like you make for your omelet for breakfast, but a yolk is an agricultural term where two things are stuck together, the way they keep horses and other animals yoked and stuck together so that the plow goes in the right direction. Just two elements linked with an and. And if you annotate one full batch of 52 questions on any form of the exam, you will see yolks everywhere. So if you look at 12B, you see fame and success. If you look at 15A, you see short-term and long-term. The College Board has some really intelligent, sharp people working for them, and the yolk is so successful at entrapping you guys because when you guys read yolks, the brain tends to consolidate the yolk into one idea, and your brain privileges the correct idea. And so they will also use terms that are adjacent related terms like fame and success. We feel like fame and success are often entwined with each other, right? People who are very successful are often well known, but there are very important distinct differences between those two things. And in this particular case, fame is an inappropriate word choice, where success is largely more or less correct. But when you read fame and success, the brain tends to flatten that into generalized success. And so you don't really notice that fame is incorrect. On 15A, this is an even more complex and problematic yolk because the yolk links two different time cues, short-term versus long-term. In the passage, let's say they refer only to short-term and the rest of the answer is correct, your brain will tend to not notice that the long-term was sort of roped in with the short-term and sort of compressed in that way. And so what's incredible, I once did this with one of my students. They sort of were struggling in one of my one-on-one classes with understanding the significance of the yolk, how it works, how it can entrap you in a particular answer. We stopped and we annotated all the yolks just for one passage, and there were 14 of them in one batch of 10 questions, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. And so it's a consistent kind of strategy that the College Board uses to keep you guys off balance and off kilter. And I always say that to do this test well, they are deeply strategic with the way they construct the exam. And so you guys really need a strategy to fight back against that. And so even with something like a yoke, that is a very strategic move to read all of your answer choices, only annotate the yolks, and then aggressively read for, skim, and consider how one of the yolks is probably going to entrap you in one of the answers. And so once you can see the yoke, that gives you some power that you didn't have before. I always tell my students too that the way that I see the exam, it's like I need to implant my vision in my brain like a chip into your brain while I coach you, because when you first start studying, you aren't going to see everything with the way that if you have the luxury of studying these exams for years, you really do start to see patterns that are invisible and that they're almost camouflage to a lot of people. Let me show you guys another invisible pattern here. I actually have noticed too over the years that the College Board is almost a little arrogant, where they know that you guys won't notice the pattern, not you guys in particular, my people with me tonight, but in general, students taking the test who have not aggressively studied and really tried hard to sort of learn all of these different tips and tricks, they will use the same problematic sort of trap right in consecutive questions. And that strikes me as just incredibly bold, that they aren't concerned about you guys noticing it. And so as a general collective, and so they'll even use the same trap over and over in consecutive questions, which is pretty shocking when you think about it. Let me coach you guys. Let's do green. Let's do hunter green. Look at 2B. This is the trope of this passage is very simple. Edmund and Catherine are in a car driving, and they have a spirited debate over hunting and whether or not hunting is ethical. So that's the context for this particular passage. 2B is interesting because it's a tangential detail that's not really important for understanding the core aspect of the passage, that it's about Edmund's education. He's of English descent, but he was educated primarily in France. So let me show you 2B. Let's also look at 8B. Catherine's anger towards Edmund has abated completely. And then let's look at number 4, and let's look at 4C. These 3 green circles have something very, very, very important in common. And when I talk about helping you guys see the exam differently, this triangle is what I'm talking about. What's happening in 2B, 8B, and 4C is something that is powerful, it's subtle, and you need this tool in your mental toolbox when you're working through the exam. So the simplest way I can teach this sort of logical heuristic to you guys is this. Think of 0, 1 in between. 0, 1 in between. 0, almost think of like the computer language, right? Like the coding. 0 is a logically negated condition, and 1 is a logically confirmed condition. And then in between, there is a vast infinite space between those two conditions. And so the most simple way I can teach this to you guys is this. It will not rain tomorrow. With your not negation Q, it will not rain tomorrow. There's a 0% chance of rain. If you just say it will rain tomorrow, that's confirmed. It's a 100% chance. If you say it might rain tomorrow, you're somewhere in that vast in between. We don't know how likely it is. We don't know how unlikely it is. The might sort of creates this vast void in between the 0 and 1 conditions. If you look at these 3 green circles though, they each represent one particular spot on that spectrum. Edmund was educated primarily in France. Catherine's anger towards Edmund has abated completely. And Edmund responds to Catherine's remarks by forcefully persuading her to accept. Let's try in the Zoom chat. Do you guys want to try and flex and see if you picked this up already? Put the numbers 2, 4, and 8 for the questions. So do 2, 4, and 8, and then put a dash and put 0, 1, or in between next to it. So do 2, 4, and 8, and then link it. Which logical condition are we talking about here? Are we talking about a 0, a 1, or an in between? What do you guys think here? A lot of people can pick this up really quickly. You guys are sharp. I know that. I've worked with you guys for long enough. You guys always amaze me. You often are great at absorbing information. I think, where's my chat at? There it is. We've got some people already ringing in here. I can explain again, absolutely. So the 0, 1, and in between conditions. 0 equals it will not rain tomorrow. 1 equals it will rain tomorrow. The in between is it might rain tomorrow. Something that's 0 is negated. Something that is a 1 is confirmed. something in between the 0 and 1 is uncertain and left up to, it's a sort of ambiguous state. Each of these 3 green circles, they represent a different part of this spectrum. So there's 1, 0, 1, 1, and 1 in between statement in these 3 green circles that I listed. Someone's gonna get it. Can I increase the, yeah, yes, yeah, absolutely. I always feel like that since I'm getting older than you guys. I always have to lean in and look close. People are getting it. People are already picking up on it. Lisa, you got it. I mean, there's some fudging with the 0 and 1 because that's, as I would teach you guys a little bit more carefully, but the 2 is in between, not to sort of spoil the surprise for people who are thinking deeply. When you say Edmund is educated primarily in France, he was not completely and exclusively educated in France, nor was he, it was not negated. It does not say that Edmund was not educated in France. He was primarily and educated in France, even though primarily suggests somewhere between, I don't know, 70% and 100. What is important about noticing this with the way they build the exam is that this is an uncertain condition. It's ambiguous. It's somewhere in between. 8B is a 0. Her anger abated completely. Abated is a word that means 0, that it's totally gone. If we say anything is abated, it's gone. It's not kind of there. It's not some, the way to be, some education in France. We know it's the majority of it, but it's still some. Not so with AB, the anger is gone. Whereas in 4C, forcefully persuaded her to accept a moderate position, she has accepted the position, it's confirmed, it's a 1. It's not like she mostly agrees. Mostly agrees would then make this in between, just like primarily educated in France. The content is different. We're talking about education versus opinions and agreeing or disagreeing on a position. But what matters is that you understand that the College Board is sort of changing the logical strength of these 3 different answers. And they do this throughout the whole exam. This is not something they do once. It's something that happens over and over and over and over. You can even see, let's actually go like this and kind of clean this up just a little bit. Even in number 8, you can watch them using this at the microscopic level. That's a little bit more of a macroscopic take on the whole passage, but let's go like this. So then we have our abated completely in blue. Look at 8D. Both of those are really important 0s. She has no idea where Edmund intends to drive next. Catherine is confused in this passage. I'd say over 75% of my students, they pick 8D. And for my students that I haven't worked with for long, D is the common trap. Everybody flocks over to D. They flock to D because they are reading the way you guys read for school. Catherine is confused. She doesn't speak French well. She's even asking in line 68 to 69 that they talk about in the question. She is expressing confusion. What is an error? She's confused about what an error is called. Conceptually, the way you read for your curriculum in high school, D telegraphs confusion. She has no idea where they're going to drive next. So because it feels conceptually apropos, everybody picks D. The problem with D, and the way I need to train you guys when you're studying for the exam, is that you need to read like a lawyer. And no idea means she has absolutely 0 clue where they're going. That is patently false. Even though she's confused, there's evidence in the passage that she has an inkling or she has some idea where they're going, but she's expressing a desire for clarity. No idea, if you're studying carefully and well, would be the first thing that you check on. And it would be the first thing that you go up, you skim, is there a negation cue? And so when I say negation cue, you can see these all over the place. It's not, it's contractions, it's words like abated. that actually express negation, but it's not as easy to spot it because they don't use a not. And so negation cues are littered throughout the exam, and they effectively turn answers into a zero. So you have to be really careful and make sure, even if, let's say, for instance, she doesn't, not only does she not have a very good idea of where they're going next, but her uncertainty is probably, if we had to, play a betting game, she probably is like 20% sure, but that is definitely not no idea, right? Confusion does not equal absolutely none. This is the last thing I'm going to draw for you guys to help you sort of absorb this. And this is a difficult concept. And so it'll take you guys a long time, not a long time, but it's something you have to practice seeing the material through. So don't feel concerned or worried if you're a little uncertain of what we're doing here. Let's do a 0 over here. Let's do the 1 over here. This is the last thing I want to talk about with this, and this is how they get you guys. Let's do 2 red X's, right? Just the way, let's say, primarily in France. Let's say Edmund was 98% educated in France, but he took one, study abroad, and he went to Italy for a week, and because he was practicing Italian. So it's like 99% of his education happened in France, but he had that 1 week in Italy. The way that they get you guys is that sounds like a 1 to the untrained test taker. The fact that he was almost exclusively educated in France, they will give you a 1 answer that expresses totality. Edmund was educated in France, period. And if you are not aware of this distinction, that 99% sounds like a 1, but from a logical perspective, it just is not. And so what's really strange about the way they build this exam, these 2 X's here have more in common with each other than the 0 and the 1 that they're right next to, because they are fundamentally, oh, excuse me, let me take a sip of my water. I've been talking all day, so I'm dehydrated. The 2 X's are fundamentally, they have a logical foundation in common with each other, and that they're both uncertain conditions. Whereas the totally negated condition versus the 1 confirmed condition, they are very distinct. But both of those X's, they sound like a 1. So it's like that's the problem here. Let's also, really quickly, I want to coach you guys on another issue besides 0-1 thinking here. Let's go to number 1. And I'm going to teach you guys something that's called a scope problem. Let's go in purple. Let's go here, 1B, and let's look at 1D. There's actually 2 cues sandwiched together here in 1D. When I tell you guys that there's a scope problem happening in B and D, what's happening is they are creating a sense of, like, let me actually pitch it to you guys like this. It's almost like in film where you're either close up or your bird's eye view of a city. And so when I talk about scope, there is an expanding and contracting way that the test writers change the scope of an answer. When you think about the context of this particular passage, it is a conversation between 2 people, the scope of 1A. Conversation is the only correct word to use to describe what is happening in this passage, but many of my students do not pick 1A. They often pick 1B and 1D. The reason they do that is because throughout the passage, the characters talk about their English and French cultural heritage and how those cultural beliefs filter into the discourse on hunting. And so oftentimes those references to British hunting practices and French hunting practices, they confuse people and think nation and society are now appropriate answer choices. After I coach you guys into scope though, this cannot possibly be a depiction of contemporary society. That depiction, the scope is massive. They'd have to be talking about every aspect of society, different levels of society, different cultural aspects of society. That is a massive statement for a small answer like 1D. The same thing for 1B. If we only have 2 people speaking in a car, you cannot call that a nationwide controversy, because in the passage, there is absolutely 0 proof that anyone else is fighting about this issue. Catherine and Edmund are disagreeing about it, but there is no proof that this is a wider discourse that involves not only a larger group, but in fact a nationwide group. There's no line for that. But B and D trap many, many, many test takers because it has this scope echo from the references to British and French heritage. When people aren't thinking about scope, you physically won't see it. This is just one exam. I just saw this before class. This just is sort of coincidental. But what's amazing, if you study well for the SAT, you start to feel like the content is almost secondary. It's really the form of the exam, the shape of it, and the construction. Look at the orange right here in lines 17 to 20. You see what they're doing? Country, city, city, country, country, city, city, country. They're alternating the scope. City is smaller scope, country is a bigger scope. It has many cities in it. Most test takers don't notice this. And so right here, you will see they already start with this in 12B, and they carry this confusion through all set of these questions where they refer to city, they refer to city, they also refer to country. Look at 11D. So you can watch how they're swapping city and country over and over. And this trips people up. It's like a banana on the floor in a cartoon, and people slip and fall because they haven't been coached to how to think through scope. And it's pervasive, I would say, in the construction of the exam. I actually have one more example for scope. Over here, I'm going to share my slides with you guys. I love my PowerPoint slides. Where would we be without technology? Let's go over here. This slide. This is a really, really tough question. It is rooted in a Karl Marx passage that is fundamentally above your reading level in high school. I did not read Marx heavily until grad school, and I frankly hated every minute of it because Marx is a towering philosophical thinker, but his syntax is tortured and complex, and it's not meant to be readable. And them providing a Marx passage for you guys is an attempt to rattle your cage, make you feel very anxious, your anxiety spikes, your performance starts to dip. One of my biggest passions for working with you guys is to keep you steady and to keep you knowing that even when you feel like you don't quite grasp the overall meaning of a passage like this one, there are tools that you can absolutely use to study yourself and still get the right answer. And this is a great example of using the scope tool to sharpen and improve your accuracy on a question like 33. If we look at 33, let me read a couple of these answers to you. Over the course of the passage, the focus shifts from A, an objective report of the political state in Europe following a rebellion, to a pessimistic questioning of that rebellion's true objective. How about B, a somber depiction of the life of an English revolutionary, to an incensed plea for change and economic equality? And let's do C, an appreciative description of the nature of revolution, to a call for the understanding of the causes of its rise and suppression. The first thing you guys should be thinking about, if we're thinking about scope, look at the difference in the scope between A and B. It is a profound difference. The political state in Europe, when you guys read that like a lawyer, when we're trying to really beat the College Board at their own game, you should hear it as this: the political state in the entirety of Europe. The scope of 33A is massive. It's huge. The scope of 33B is much, 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 much smaller. It's the life of a single person, one English revolutionary. So knowing scope as a tool becomes almost like a Snapchat filter that you lay over the text, and then suddenly the answers are organizable by scope. The trap answer is always A. Almost, I'd say this is one of those 90% questions where it's not just a majority or a simple majority, that the vast majority of people get 33 wrong. They get it wrong because the word political is appropriate. The term Europe is appropriate because if you actually look too, on the right box, this is the opening of the passage over here. They actually drop Europe. They name drop Europe in the first line. And because this is a focus shift question, this is a big picture question, the College Board also anticipates where you guys are going to skim. and they will drop keywords that they know you're going to skim those sentences, and they will intentionally layer them into questions. And so this is how they use Europe in the first sentence, though. The first act of the revolutionary drama on the continent of Europe has closed. If you map the grammar of that sentence, the important thing is the noun drama. This drama happened in or on the continent of Europe. That is a very different statement than saying we're going to report on the entirety of Europe. Very different scope. One thing happens on the continent of Europe is small. Reporting on the entire political state of Europe is massive. And so, but the duplication of Europe is a key noun. The tone is more or less political. Also the word objective, that as a genre, this is a history, historical philosophy passage, more or less. And you guys tend to associate history with facts and something that's boring. And so the word objective feels appropriate to you. In C, the word appreciative feels inappropriate, an appreciative description. And I would absolutely agree with you. If you're thinking, Marx is not appreciative of anything. I feel like he was a pretty intense thinker and an intense writer. And the word appreciative does not fit well tonally with this passage, but the scope is correct. Nature of revolution is the appropriate scope. There's one idea that he's writing about, and that is the nature of revolution, and in particular, the cause. And so the keyword cause in C hits the scope, the nail on the head. The thing I need to teach you guys is that scope can help you realize the trap answer is factually and objectively incorrect. However, objective report versus appreciative description, it's subjectively wrong. And so when I say there's a big difference here on reading between something that feels subjectively off versus a factually objective quantity, or something that you can actually argue in court, that I always imagine the College Board is a very vast organization, and they have to be extremely careful. And so one of the key things that I always talk about with my students, let's go back to slide 2, is that the exam often feels unfair. It feels like some of the differences are arbitrary, that if appreciative description is wrong or it's subjectively wrong, how do I know not to pick it? And that if you have a good coach, they will show you how to sniff out the difference and know the difference between something that is objectively provable as wrong versus something that is subjectively imprecise. And that is a very, very critical difference to internalize to beat this section of the exam, because they're very good at dialing the subjectivity in a certain direction so that your brain has no interest in a particular answer. I can actually show you one more great example of this. In the question I already showed you guys for Catherine and Edmund, number 1. 1A, a record of an often tense conversation. Tense conversation feels right, but in my one-on-one classes, I cannot tell you how often my students will say, record just doesn't seem right. Record just doesn't sound right. There's no transcript here. It's just two people having a normal dialogue in a car while they drive somewhere. There is no sense that there's something official happening. Records, you typically think of transcripts or court records or something that's more factual or official. That word is subjectively inappropriate. Is it factually wrong? No, the passage does sort of document this exchange between the two of them, but it's subjectively imprecise, but your brain won't like it. And so you have to know the difference between the scope. Are we in a conversation or are we in a nationwide controversy? So you have to think through scope, get the part that's factually verifiable, and then go from there. Let me go back to my slide. So the test often feels unfair to you guys, especially in the reading portion in the writing, because there are elements of subjectivity with reading and interpretation that you can't escape, but the College Board has been forced to make it objective. And so my goal is to always coach you guys into seeing what's objectively there. I can show you a really simple, really easy example. I'm not going to walk us through the complexity of 3, 4, and 5. There's 3 questions here in a row that most of my students get wrong. One of them is a really rough question, number 3, where none of these answer choices are really correct. None of them reflect the truth. This is a fiction passage with Edgar Allan Poe. And Poe is actually making a joke here that French people tend to brag about themselves. And he's kind of taking this kind of little low blow approach and making this sarcastic quip. But three answers, the number three answers don't give you that truth. They give you this peculiar variety of answers that are often very vague. Like if you look at 3A, a situation that is of special interest to people of a certain nationality, that tells you almost nothing about this passage. The word situation, it says people but not who. It doesn't even say which nationality. And three is correct because it's not technically wrong. There's nothing in it. It's like an empty shell, whereas B, C, and D are technically incorrect. Look at 3D. The word types, I always coach you guys into something called a quantity Q. There's an S on types, it's plural. There's only one type mentioned. If we talk about types of people, only France was discussed in the passage. That single quantity Q is the reason why D, which sounds like a much better answer, is in fact incorrect. So a quantity Q, that's something so simple you could think for. Think about and look for. Another simple thing, look at the red in number 4. As opposed to the last question where all of those answers are fundamentally not the truth, in number 4, all of these answers except for D are correct. They're all the truth. They all reflect something basic and true about the content of the passage, which puts you guys in a different conundrum, right? If you're moving from everything being wrong to everything being right, that's really disorienting and hard to deal with. And so if we're thinking A, B, and C fundamentally reflect something true about the passage, then what is it? How do you adjudicate between those three? The Q is in bright red. It's superlative language. And then I annotated the appropriate part of the passage that reflects the superlative language in the actual reading text. Above all is a literal superlative language cue that links into the most of the question. If you don't know that, and you haven't been coached to notice this, you will get 4 wrong. And you will also waste tons of time on 3, 4, and 5, because the way the College Board built this trio of questions, they are extremely difficult to wind your way through if you don't have any particular tools or anything to help you out. So these are just some, gosh, time flies when you're having fun. It's 4:45. We want to make sure you guys have time for a Q&A too. So we do have 15 minutes left. If you guys have questions, please flood the Zoom chat at any point now, and I'd be happy to address any questions that you have about the exam that you want to think through or talk out. Oh yeah, you're welcome, Lisa, for sure. Thank you too. That's amazing that you got that, Lisa, that you figured that out that quickly. That is a wonderful, wonderful heuristic for you guys to internalize today, the 0, 1 in between conditions. If you can kind of hold that on, hold that in your mind as you keep practicing, that alone will be a great help to you. Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Thank you, Dr. Neiman. Thank
Oh,
you.
for sure,
That's
for sure.
very helpful. Yeah. So yeah, I strongly recommend to join Dr. Neiman's SAT all-in-one class to prepare for the SAT, the coming SAT. Like what I mentioned at the beginning. So it's very important to practice when you fully understand how they trick you. Otherwise, I heard a lot of my students, they talk about they have a tons of practice, they did a many mock tests, but they still have like the certain score, they can't really improve. You don't really want to wait until then you want to just try to figure out, because when you do tons of practice, the mistakes are repeating. So actually, you are trying to emphasize your mistakes while you are wasting your time doing the right question. So that's why we really want you to, prepare and knowing how they design the question and how they design the test before you do tons of practice. So that's why I don't really agree with like a practice make perfect. I believe like study smarter, not really harder, sometimes. Okay. So I want to introduce a little bit more for the SAT, ACT mock test strategy class and also the all-in-one class. So we designed the class based on the question type and also the passage type. So for the question type, Dr. Neiman gonna walk through all the different question type, like main idea, like evidence, like pair question, inference question, like the words in context, like the tricks that he just mentioned and explained. And we also have SAT mock test strategy and a review, which means we want every student to do one whole mock test, then we analyze all the mistakes and also apply the strategy together with those mistakes. And every single day you have like the full test plus the full report and also all the review with the strategies. We also have the SAT Common Track reviews, which is like the Dr. Newman will solely teaching that class as well. Basically, Dr. Newman put all the easy made mistake questions together. It's like the collection. It's like a trapped question collection. So we want to analyze all the easy made mistakes questions and what it look like, what is the pattern. So whenever you see those questions, you feel like, oh, there's alert. Like I know they're gonna trick me, and how I'm gonna avoid that mistakes. So for the SAT all-in-one, which is we also call SAT 1,500 plus master study and review, and English master class is the next class that I'm going to teach about, because if you guys hear like last week, I give the demo class for the English master class. So on the screen, we have like upcoming class with SAT English master class, mock test strategy, common traps, and also the 8-day SAT all-in-one. So if you're interested, just give a call. We're gonna give you the free mock test. So you will do the test and then you will see where you are, and if you can self-prepare or you need to join the certain classes. And all the classes we offer the mentor and the teacher and also all the operation staff to fully support you. So we want to make sure every student get well prepared for their test. So hopefully you guys can all get your SAT done. If you're 10th grade and 11th grade, just to do as fast as you can, because you really want to wait until later. Because last year, my students who are applying for university, some of them, they just couldn't have a chance to take SAT because the virus, they just lost their chance. And luckily last year is like optional. Some of the school are optional. But if you look at the requirement, many of the students, they still offer their SAT score, which it's really easy for them to stand out, right? So you don't really want to lose the chance. So just get this down and don't spend too much time and don't repeat it too many times. Oh, by the way, there's a good news for this year. The scholarship, the merit scholarship, they don't really ask you for the PSAT score. They ask for SAT score as well. So if you get a good SAT score, so you can also submit your application for the merit scholarship. So let's work it on this together. All right. So thank you, Dr. Neiman, again for giving us such a wonderful, amazing class, like always. All
Of
right. So,
course, of course. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it.
okay. So
Yeah.
if you have any question, you can just type in the chat box.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much to both June and Dr. Neiman for sharing some of your guys'
Okay.
strategies on the SAT reading.
Yeah, here comes one class. So one student's essay, will there be a recording of this session sent to through email? Well, usually we do live session. We don't really record it, but if you follow us on the YouTube and Facebook, we will share the recording in the separate sections on the YouTube channel. So follow us on the YouTube channel. And I also have a question, say, what class shall I got? I never took SAT before. Well, I think if you never take SAT before, that's a great chance for you to start preparing like freshly. So I suggest you to take the SAT all-in-one 8 days, because there's no essay anymore. Just to focus on the multiple choices, get your math and English done. So I think the 8 day can help you to go through all the test strategies, and then you can just start preparing and for your tests. And I think you can register for either May test or June test. Yeah. Because right now you don't need to take the essay anymore since they already cancel it. So if even you have a chance, I told my students only if you get very confident about your essay, you can take the essay. Otherwise, just no essay or wait until June. Yeah. So, but I do believe you guys should take as soon as possible, because every time the SAT test is changing. So you never know which test is easier and harder. But now the COVID-19 and there has been a long time no SAT test, and I think you should take the chance. Like the first time when SAT do the total change, and the first students who took the SAT, they got like super high score. It's easier actually. So the SAT in December, they got a higher score than Euro. So please take this as soon as possible if you prepare for it. All right, so go ahead and.
All right, great. Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I was just going to say that we just still have a lot of 70DU academic advisors on the call who can take all of your questions in either English or Chinese, whatever suits you best. And these academic advisors will be able to help you guys create like a personalized, learning strategy and guide you guys on what classes are best suited for you guys. So yeah, we'll all stick around on the call. Please unmute yourself or type in the chat or the question box if you have any questions. And then last thing is, if you just have any general questions, email us at info@7edu.org or message us on WeChat if you have further questions about 7edu's courses and programs. I'm going to drop all of our contact information once again into the chat. Again, here's where we post all of the latest trends and things like that. And so again, we're going to stick around on the call. Please send us your questions.
Okay, Lisa, I send you the class information into the chat box. All right, we have someone to raise the hands. Any question? Okay, if I take the subject test already and I got a good score on it, should I still write it somewhere on my college vacation? Yes, of course. Yeah, so they lost the chance to take SAT subject. If you already have it, congratulations, you got your chance. You should write it. The YouTube channel is 7EDU Impact Academy. I also have a question. Do you recommend the students to read the passage first or glance at all the question and options given? Dr. Neiman, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, I have a thought about this for you guys that the biggest issue and problem I think with reading is that you cannot let yourself read as if you need to understand every line equally. And so the first time you read, I want you guys reading quickly and efficiently and not stopping. Like if you're thinking of it visually, almost like a typewriter, never let your eyes think, oh wait, I don't know if I understood lines, 8 through 20. Don't go back up and reread again. Go, because there's a big chance that the hardest parts of the passage, they might not even ask a question about it. And so they often don't. Like in the Karl Marx passage that I mentioned to you guys, that Marx passage is brutal, and the most confusing parts of it, they actually don't ask about. So they tend to, when they give you a hardball passage, they will keep the questions focused on the more straightforward parts of it. And so you don't want to give yourself, that stress of trying to understand the whole passage. On the flip side, like and it does depend by student, like some students have certain rhythms to how they work that, so it's individualized, so I don't give blanket recommendations, but I would also caution you guys against wasting time trying to read questions, then read the passage, then read the questions again. Like if you're constantly moving back and forth and going out of order, certain students get very disoriented, and especially under the pressure or performance of the exam day, you can, forget to go back. You sometimes, if you're moving out of order, you can get kind of flustered. And so just be really careful when you do start to move the test apart and you're not taking it in a linear fashion. But I would say read quickly, read efficiently, don't go back, and you're just looking to map the passage mentally. You're not looking to understand every line. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Neiman.
Yeah,
And
for
actually,
sure.
there's another question that I would like to discuss with you. And I think it's quite common. A lot of students ask why, when I prepare for SAT, it's just really hard for me to manage the time very well. And actually, there's a lot of factors because, for that kind of situation. Would you like to share a little bit more for that?
Absolutely. And so I can actually tell you guys too that when I was your age, my biggest Achilles heel was pacing, and that I always wanted to feel 125% sure. And I just did not want to move on until I was certain. And I had to teach myself how to let go a little bit. And sort of when I was 80% sure, I moved on, and I sort of overcame that pacing problem. The stuff that I showed you guys today, like the issue of scope, when they give you a word choice that feels uncomfortable and feels like it's wrong, you will lose so much time trying to think about Marx doesn't have an appreciative tone. How could that possibly be the answer? And then objective feels more correct or it sounds better. When you don't have a tool like scope, you will waste time on tone and word choices that are inappropriate, that aren't going to give you the objective decision to make. And so the tools that we have, they increase the speed because you now know what to look for and how to vertically read a set of answers and then go right to that. If there's a negation cue, Catherine says she has no idea, you're looking for a negation cue in the passage. So you save time. So I feel like that's really, you need the tools to sort of cut down when you're frozen and wasting time and just thinking through the subjective sort of like word choice problems that most of us read like that for school. So you guys sort of get taught at school how to read more for tone and concept, and then you get punished for reading that way oftentimes, like on certain questions on the SAT.
Exactly. And I think in the school is more about black and white passages, they because they selected for teenagers for that age. But when
Yep,
it comes to SAT, they give you like the adult. The passage for adult is more like nuanced. So it's just hard. And you really have to, get the gist of the passages, understand what the test designer, what they want. So otherwise it's just really hard for you. And I have the same concern because when I was at that age, it just kind of like nervous. So when you're nervous, you some simple question become harder. So for
mm,
example, some questions, I would like to read it 2 times, to make sure what it really test. And the first time, maybe after I read it, I forgot what they test. So you really want to find out what the situation you are in, what cost you more time and why you can't really manage well. So I suggest you to separate into different section and to time yourself to see which part you need to spend more time and why and how. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Neiman, for sharing that information as well.
of course, of course.
All right, thank you guys, and thank you, Dr. Neiman. Thank you all for joining 7EDU. And we would like to continue offering guys like amazing courses and useful resources. Just follow us on the YouTube channel, Facebook, and we already sent that into the chat box. And also, please scan a QR code if you have any question. And hopefully, everybody can get a good score. Finger crossed for you guys. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Dr. Neiman. Have a great weekend.
Thank you guys. Good luck. Study hard.
Okay.